Welcome back. You know what we're going to talk about now is I am going to teach you the 1% rule. And you're going to go, what's the 1% rule? Well, this is a rule that I use that I can apply to any property that you are considering buying or renting to know whether you should own it or you should rent it or a property that is similar to it. I see a lot of entrepreneurs that waste a ton of money on a property location. And when we start adding those dollars up, those are dollars that don't end up in your pocket because we're giving them away. Now, if you are an individual and you are watching this is going to be very helpful to you too, because this application, I'm going to use a house as an example, but it applies and it doesn't matter what the property is that you're considering at that time. So we're going to do a little bit of screen sharing so that we'll be able to bring this up and do our slideshow. And we're going to do this from the beginning because some of these I really need to have the visual on here for you. It'll make the world go quite a bit easier. So we're going to talk about managing your financial resources. And just a quick recap, I am Amy Rose Herrick, and I am America's Profit Building Specialist. And I am here to save you time and to make you more money. So here's your chance to learn a little bit more today. Now, I have to give a disclosure, and for those of you who are attorneys, you will appreciate this. These are general concepts. Now, understand I'm talking to a very wide audience, and you need to consult professionals for your own specific details on any transactions. But I'm trying to open your mind and give you some new tools that you may not have when you're looking at a piece of property. Now, many of you have never heard of the 28, 33, 36, 40 debt rules, where these are the rules that I use with my clients that have been successful in being able to manage their lifestyle with their income, regardless of how much money they're making or not making, if things have changed. And of course, we've seen a lot of that over the last couple of years. Now, in this presentation, I'm only going to address the 28% mark that has to do with housing. Now, what is the 28% rule? Well, my example is for every $1,000 of income, your target is not to spend any more than 28% on housing. I don't care if you make $5,000 a month. I don't care if you make $100,000 a month. I don't care if you make $2,947. We can still use the same amount, whatever your pay is, times 28%, and know that that should be the cap on what you spend on housing. Now, for some of you, you may go into qualify and you may be able to qualify for more than that, but qualify and afford are two very different words. And it does not mean that you can afford the home that you're qualifying for. And as I walk you through some of these examples, you'll understand why I feel that way. We're going to talk about managing your mortgage. Well, many of you are not going to pay cash for your homes. You're going to be required to get a mortgage. And I need you to step back and think about when you're qualifying for this mortgage, especially when there is a couple involved. I don't care what your marital status is. If you are buying a property with some type of a partner, there's some long-term results that we need to look at here. Are you going to qualify based on one income or two? Because if you're qualifying based on two incomes, so you can qualify for a larger house or a larger payment, what happens when one person becomes unemployed? Are you still going to be able to make those payments? What happens if you have children that come into the mix? Is someone going to stay home and be a stay-home parent? If you bought the house based on two incomes, will you be able to do that with the addition of expenses for a baby, or if there is an adoption, and one parent coming out of the workforce? Will you be able to afford childcare? So if you're stretched to the limit and you do plan on children, but you plan to go back into the workforce, do you have enough room to pay for childcare and all those expenses? Because it can be an absolute budget buster. And I will tell some people, twins, triplets, and preemies happen, and that can dramatically change the financial structure for a family. What if you saw it coming on the horizon and one of you is going to need to take time out of the workforce, whether you have access to the Family Medical Leave Act or not, and take care of parents or take care of relatives that are incompetent or having a significant medical crisis, and you're not going to have a payroll check coming in? If you qualify based on two incomes and you can see some of these things coming, You may want to qualify only on one. And the other suggestion that I would have is when you're considering doing something along those lines, go test the budget for 6 months. I want you to make the payments, the installments, whatever that financial commitment would be, and put it in a bank account for whatever is the difference between what you're handling now and what you're looking at handling with this significant per 6 months. You cannot touch this money for anything, because if you were making the payments and under that responsibility, you would not be able to touch that money. That'll give you a good test of whether this is affordable for you, whether you can qualify for it or not. Of course, then you can take the money that's set aside and use that for your moving, redecorating money, or to help with some of the closing costs. I would tell you to keep it and set aside, and we're going to come back to that later on already pre-funding a repair and maintenance budget item that you're going to have. Now, the other thing, to put this in a little different terms, is depending upon the amount of income that you make each month. I went through and just picked amounts between $1,000 and $15,000. So you'd be able to get an idea of what I feel is the maximum gross payment that you should have at this point on your housing, and how I come up with that. Why do I say 28% when I have seen some lenders take self-employed individuals and take them up to 36 and 40, which I think is a stranglehold? Because, if you're a W-2 employee, we got to pay Social Security taxes. That comes out of your payroll before you ever see it. Why do you think they get taxes first instead of last? Now, if you are self-employed, you are both the employee and the employer, who normally matches at 7.65%. So you're going to be paying a 15.3% load. Now, what about income taxes? They don't go away. So depending upon what your income level is, that could maybe be as little as 10% if you're in the lowest bracket because of all your deductions, or perhaps it's 37%. And this is all on top of whatever this payment commitment could be. Many of you are going to live in a state with state income taxes. Well, that's probably another 3 to 10% off your income. You might have installment debts already. Think about cars, student loans, braces. Do you have anything else that's on an installment basis? Maybe you're paying a family member back for something. I don't know. Medical bills. There are many things that happen in life. Credit card bills. Now, when you start looking at 28% for housing and somewhere between 765 and 15.3 for Social Security, and income taxes 10 to 37 and state income taxes 3 to 10, you can see where there isn't a lot of money left over. And I go back to whether you qualify for a payment or you can afford it. Two very, very different terms that are not interchangeable. This is what I find is usually the real budget buster on a house that is never talked about at the closing table. I know from my experience that you usually need to set aside somewhere between 3 and 10% of the value of the property for repairs and maintenance. Now, there are some years you are not going to need to spend this money, and it's just going to accrue. But you are not going to touch this money that you hold in a separate account, because you're going to get hit with a big expense, whether that is a roof replacement, a significant plumbing repair, you've got to take trees out. Something is going to happen. You're just going to have to take my word for it. And another thing that I've seen happen, and I can't explain why other than maybe they were bought around the same time, but when the refrigerator dies, the washer or the dryer gets jealous and they want replaced too, maybe even the hot water heater. But all of those things have to be paid for. And if you aren't planning for them in advance, it can just absolutely kill your budget. I usually say about 3 to 5% for a regular home or a well-maintained home. Now, if you happen to buy a fixer-upper, you're probably going to have to set aside 10% a year until you get the property up to the level that it can switch over to just regular repairs and maintenance. And that can be a real challenge to do when you're trying to live in the house, you're making the payments, and you're also trying to do the repairs. In an example, for a $200,000 home, that could be $6,000 at a 3% rate, all the way up to $20,000 a year for this property. So that adds another $500 to $1,667 a month on average to your budget over and above all of those items that we talked about before. And I want to caution you that repairs and maintenance monies is not redecorating money. That's an entirely different pool of money. Now we got to talk about one more hidden cost. How long are you planning on staying in the home? Because, whenever you sell a home, there are costs involved in that. When you buy a home, there are costs. So we need to be realistic about what this house is going to cost us to stay in. Now, I generally say that you set aside an additional 10% of the purchase price in addition to the down payment for redecorating, repairs, furniture, moving costs, whatever. So just getting into a property, I usually suggest 10% is a good number. It may be more, it may be less, but it's a number. I also suggest that you set aside 10% of the value of the home when you sell it that you are going to lose. That's generally going to come out of your equity. And if you don't have enough equity, you're going to have to come to the closing table with cash in order to complete the sale. So on example, if I bought a home and I'm down here and I'm thinking I'm going to probably sell it in 5 to 7 years, maybe when my family's a little larger, or I'm expecting to have some debts paid off and I'll have a little more discretionary income. And I'm believing the house is worth $400,000 because, again, it's just a number for our example. $400,000 times 10% is I'm planning on needing to have $40,000 in expected selling costs. It may be more. It may be a little less, but it's a number to work on. Now, if I take that $40,000 and I divide it by 60 months, which is the same as 5 years, then I know I need to be setting aside another $667 a month to take care of those selling costs in 5 years. If I think, no, it'll be closer to 7 years, well, that's still $476 a month. And I know some of you are going to be thinking, oh, well, that property is going to appreciate. Well, I've looked at a lot of real estate contracts, and I can assure you, I have never seen one that part of the contractual agreement is that property is going to appreciate in value. I have seen them appreciate in value. I have also seen them tumble in value as much as 40% almost overnight with a couple of announcements that affected a community. So I don't believe in appreciation. When you receive it, great, but I don't count on it happening. Inflation will eat up a lot of the appreciation anyway. Now let's look at housing expenses that should fall underneath the 28% rule, in my opinion. If I'm using the same $400,000 home example, I said the loan was at 4%. I know some of you are going to say at this time, oh, well, rates are a little lower. Well, not everybody has that rate. Not everybody has that credit rating either to qualify. Maybe they're doing it where it is a seller financed. Again, it's a number, folks. So if I take $320,000 loan at 4%, my monthly principal and interest portion is $1,528. Now the insurance, and of course you've got to have insurance on the home if there's a loan, I'm estimating at 1.5% of value. Now, if you live in an area that is earthquake, flooding, hurricane, natural disaster, tornadoes, it may be higher than that, but it was a good, fair number I could pick. I also estimated the taxes at 1.5% of value. I've seen some areas that are significantly less. I've seen some that are much more, but it's a number that we can use for our example, and you would fine tune this for your own property. Remember that normal repairs and maintenance? Well, I pegged it at 3.2%. The selling cost in 5 years, and this $400,000 property, assuming that I put $80,000 down to get the loan that's tied up in the home, is going to cost me at least $4,262 a month. And this is a very important number because then I can use it to compare to some other things here in a minute. So you're going to see a recap of the numbers we went on. But then on top of that, do you plan on having electricity in your home if it's not solar powered? If it is solar powered, are you going to have to plan for battery replacement? Any of those things into your factor here? Propane, gas, alarm system, cable, bug spraying, homeowners association dues. If you bought a condo, what does a condo have? A condo has monthly maintenance fees. Do you have pool, yard, landscaping? When you start adding all of these up, this is one of the ways that I have seen people become house poor. when they qualified for a loan, but when you really step back and looked at the entire picture, they could not afford that level of a home to maintain it and to do the things required. There's a lot of responsibilities with being a homeowner. I get asked a lot, well, should I get a 15-year or a 30-year loan? Again, I'm using the same principal interest. The payment, I'm assuming it's at 4%. We're going to go over to our $400,000 example, kind of in the middle there. And at 15 years, when I'm looking at what the total payments could be on any of these options, and I see how much we have paid for the house over that period of time. Well, one of the things people will look at and say, oh, well, in order to get a bigger house, I've got to bring the payment down. So I'm going to take the loan out for a longer period of time, and then I can qualify for a bigger house. Okay, but how much more are you paying for it? In each one of these examples, you will notice that it doesn't matter whether you take a 15-year mortgage or a 30-year mortgage, you're going to pay almost 40% more for that house over time by stretching it out to 30 years versus 15 years. Are you willing to pay 40% more than the list price today? If the answer is no, you may not want to do a 30-year loan, because that's exactly what you're going to be doing if you maintain and you stay in the home over that time frame, or you turn it into a rental. Let's be candid. Not all of us know what our future looks like. We just know what we assume it could be. Should you pay off a low interest mortgage early? I get this question all the time too. Well, there are a lot of variables to consider. Are you putting credit cards at the top of your list of where to pay for your purchases, but you never get the balances paid off? If you're paying credit card interest that is $17.99 or $24.99, you should be eliminating that credit card debt, and you should be dealing with the problem of why you are reliant on credit cards and can't get rid of them, instead of paying off your mortgage early at a low little 4%. You are throwing your money away, in my opinion, if you are putting it towards a mortgage at 4% and you're racking up credit card debt that is in the double digits and significantly higher than that. Are you able to itemize? With the changes in tax law, many of you have absolutely no tax advantage to having a mortgage. It's been taken off of the table. Do you see an income reduction coming on the horizon, what's going to make it very difficult for you to make these payments? Well, your answer may be to refinance, if that is an option, to a lower interest rate, or you may need to already be on the path to downsizing. So you'll be able to live within your means and not get caught in a trap where you are in a desperate situation financially, your credit score is being ruined, and there is no money. Have you been eliminating your savings in order to make the higher payments into the mortgage? I'm going to tell you that's a no-no too, because the only way that you can get to the equity in your home is, number one, to sell it, which we know costs money, or to go get a loan against it if there isn't enough equity for you to be able to borrow against it, and if you can qualify for an additional payment. So I'm going to tell you, if putting more money towards your mortgage eliminates your savings, put the money in savings to avoid the credit card debt and those type of things. Here's another deadly, signal to me. Are you eliminating life insurance and disability insurance out of your budget in order to make an extra payment on your mortgage? You know what? If you're not here to pay that mortgage, or you're ill and you can't make the mortgage payments, we're going to lose that house. So to me, that is an automatic red flag that you should not be putting additional money into the mortgage if you don't have adequate life and disability coverage to protect your ability to stay in that house. Again, you need to talk to a professional like me or someone else to make sure that you're doing the right things that will increase the wealth for you and then into the generations to come. That's my whole goal here, is to save you time and money. This is a hard one for many people. Is it time to walk away? Things have not gone exactly the way that you anticipated. Do you need to release this property to save you financially from further hardship? I don't care if they've deferred it, they've delayed it, you've had late fees, racked up payments and everything. Has it gotten to the point where you are not going to be able to overcome this? When you took the loan out, the world looked different, but we've got to deal with the reality of what the world looks like now. Are you near foreclosure or way behind on your payments? What's going to look the best on your credit report? Because you're still going to have a life going forward if you need to release this house, and you need to do it the most economically way possible. Do you have condo fees stacking up you can't pay? Well, right in your agreements within those, they have the rights to take that property and force a sale if necessary to collect back condo fees. That's another one at times when it gets too far behind and you don't have much equity in the property, it is a losing situation. Did you originally borrow more than you really could have afforded because you didn't have this conversation before you had already signed the papers? It's okay. Everybody makes a mistake. You can fix a mistake if you want to, if you choose to. Divorce. Divorce changes everything. A job loss changes everything. Forced early retirement changes everything. Being pulled out of the workforce to care for an ill or dying family member changes everything. Are you unable to do the repairs and the property is deteriorating? Remember, we built into the budget somewhere between 3 and 10% a year to maintain the property. I've seen this many times when individuals are house poor and they're desperately hanging on to the house. But as the house deteriorates, it's going to cost more and more money to fix it. The damages get worse and worse, and the value of the house is declining. We're not going to be able to do the repairs, and it just becomes a huge sinkhole. And it not only sucks your resources, but it sucks the very joy out of your being, and it becomes a burden instead of a joy. What happens when death occurs to an owner? Well, what happens to the mortgage? Well, if two people borrowed based on both of their incomes and took out a mortgage, and one of those individuals dies, well, the co-borrower is responsible for the full amount of the loan and the full amount of the payment, whether there's one household income or two at that point. So you need to think about these things. If they don't have life insurance as a beneficiary to pay it off, or they don't have enough resources, what's going to happen in this scenario? We also have the estate involved. And I have a different sessions that I'll be doing about the titling of your assets that come into play here. But if there is a mortgage against the house, and let's pretend that I'm single. I'm single. I owned my home. I passed away, and it was my intent to leave the house to my adult daughter. But there's a mortgage against the house. My adult daughter needs to be able to pay off that mortgage, or to be able to qualify to refinance the mortgage into her name and make the payments, because that mortgage is not going away. She will not be able to obtain that property free and clear unless that mortgage that was in my name was retired. So we need to be talking to our family members about, does my daughter even want the property? If she doesn't want the property, very simple. Upon my death, it is immediately to be sold, put up for market, because there's an impact there to the next generation on what happens on the titling of that property. Well, does the titling of the property matter? And I'm going to tell you absolutely yes. Many of you will see the term JTWROS. You have no idea what it was, but you went ahead and signed the paper that someone else filled out because you thought they knew what they were doing. Well, JTWROS stands for Joint Trust with Rights of Survivorship. You will see this not only on properties, but you can see it on other types of accounts. What that means is we have got more than one owner on the property. And if one owner dies, all of their rights and ownership of the property transfer automatically to the joint owner. Doesn't go through a will, doesn't go through probate, doesn't go through estate, because the JTWROS overrides anything that the will would say. We can have tenants in common. And in tenants in common, I may own this property as tenants in common with my spouse. But at my death, I own one half of that property, and it's called an undivided interest. It doesn't operate like JTWROS. That means that my 50% share, I can dispose of any way I want. I may give it to my spouse. I may give it to my daughter. I may give it to charity. And the other owner in the tenants in common has absolutely no say in what I do with that property. Now, I have seen a lot of properties that were owned between siblings because of a death of a parent. The way these assets are titled is very, very important. Now, if the house happens to be in one person's name only when they have a spouse or life partner, what happens to that property? Well, that's a great question. Do they have a will? Because if they have a will, it will be distributed based on what the will provisions are. But if you don't have a will, it is whatever jurisdiction that you live in has specified will happen to the property. So, for example, if I lived in a jurisdiction, and let me say a jurisdiction could be the state you live in. It could be Kansas, Idaho, California. I live in the U.S. Virgin Islands, whatever your jurisdiction is. And if you own foreign property in Greece, maybe in Barbados, maybe you own it in Canada, they're going to have their own rules. But let's say that I'm married. I didn't bother with a will because I just didn't want to get around to it. But the local laws in my jurisdiction where that property is located and where I lived said that 2/3 of the property will be given to my children and 1/3 goes to my spouse. Well, how do you think that's really going to work out? It could be trust owned. So many of you will have a living trust. Some of you are confused about what a living trust will and will not do. A living trust allows assets to be distributed per your wishes. It is not part of the probate process, and so therefore it can be relatively quiet and is not a matter of public record. Assets that are in the trust are also not attached by creditors like they would be in a will. Again, I am not your attorney, but these are some things that you need to be educated and aware of so that you can plan your affairs accordingly. What's a mess? A property has been passed down and now has multiple owners with different fractional interests that no one has been able to actually get the titles on. Heirs can't be found. Fractional owners keep dying it and splitting it up in the will, and it sets and rots, and the legal fees to try and get this thing taken care of are astronomical. I was aware of one piece of farmland that the grandparents had given to the parents, to the children, and then the children gave it to their children. And yes, there were people died and they split it up because they wanted to keep it in the family. And the joke was with 134 owners, which 2 square feet do you own? But it was such a mess in trying to get the title fixed. And really, it should probably end up with one owner. Well, who's that be? Who's willing to sell? Who's not willing to sell? And you need to take care of these things quickly and promptly and cleanly. Now we're going to talk about that 1% rule of ownership versus renting that I was telling you about. You can apply this to any property. We're going to go back and we're going to look at this $400,000 home example. So I've got the loan, I've got the numbers that we saw before, but what if I'm looking in this particular neighborhood, or I'm looking in this particular industrial park, and I know that it's going to cost me at least $42.62 a month for this property, plus all of the other items. Or if I can find a $400,000 property and I can rent it for less than 1% of the value, which is $4,000 a month, I am generally better off to rent the property and save my cash versus owning it and then also being on the hook for all the repairs and maintenance that are the responsibility of the owner, the increases in insurance costs, the increases in taxes, damage, wear and tear, whatever the case may be. Now, if you look over here in the right-hand column that I've got on your little box, if less than $42.62 a month, then ownership does not make financial sense in most cases. If I can rent a similar property for $4,000 a month, that saves me at least $262 a month. It could be much more because of these wild cards with the question mark. Times 12 is over $3,100 a year cheaper for me to rent than it is to buy the house. Now let that sink in. What is $3,100 a year times 10 years? That's $31,000. There are situations where it definitely makes sense to buy. There are situations that definitely make sense to rent. But I find using that 1% rule usually is a very good guideline on that type of thing. There are a few other borrowing options that you may want to carefully consider when you're thinking about a home. Some individuals will have a home that is paid off, or they're looking at taking a reverse mortgage for the retiree. You got to be over the age of 65. You've got to have equity in your home, and you must have an exit plan. And when I say an exit plan, what do you want to happen to this property after you're gone? Are you planning on passing off to the kids? Remember my example about if there is a reverse mortgage against the property, is the property just going to be sold to pay off the mortgage and then distribute whatever money is left to the heirs? Is your intent to pass the house on to the kids, but you don't want a mortgage? Well, then you probably are going to need life insurance, or you're going to need other money in the bank to retire that mortgage. Now, there are some excellent online tools if you are even considering a reverse mortgage, for some of you in my viewing audience, that you can use that will give you some estimates without applying. You don't have to give your email address or anything else. And I would encourage you to talk to a professional before you do something like that. And if a child is pressuring you to do that, that's a little different discussion. But for many of you to be able to stay in your homes after retirement, which is your heart's desire, you may not have the income to be able to continue make mortgage payments and to do the repairs and maintenance. But by doing a reverse mortgage, which eliminates the payments and allows you to actually pull an income stream off of the home. Got a bug. You just can't do it with live, can you? There's always something. Anytime you do a live issue video. So work with me, folks. I'm just a human, just like the rest of you are. So that is something that is a much deeper conversation if you are considering doing a reverse mortgage, because that comes into play on whether you're thinking about downsizing or changing houses and buying and selling costs. Now, I want you to know that you can ask Amy anything. If it deals with money, I am a wizard. I work with businesses and I work with individuals. You'll see in the notes a couple of ways that you can get in touch, or if you'd like to see some more on how that you would be able to do that and have access to any of those types of things at your leisure. And so therefore, I appreciate you took your little bit of time to spend with me. I hope it was very helpful. And now you know something that the majority of the people don't, was what is the 1% rule when you are trying to decide between renting and owning a property. Be blessed, and I look forward to seeing you on a different day.